Hey everybody, it's CC and JT from the CC and JT Amateur Hour. Production values go to die. This is part of our continuing series to point out and welcome writers from across the nation and around the world to elevate the visibility of their great works. And boy, today we're excited. We're
We
happy.
are.
We are happy to welcome Debbie Russell, the writer of, and I'm reading this because I want to get it right, Crossing 51, Not Quite a Memoir. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here with you both.
And we are so very, very happy to have you because your book is fascinating. It resonates with us for reasons we'll talk about as we get into this podcast. But first, let's hear your sales pitch, Debbie. Who are you and why should we buy your book?
I am a lawyer turned writer. So, writing is sort of a second career for me. I was a prosecutor in our local district attorney's office for 25 years, saw a lot of terrible things that people did to each other. And I took early retirement, and I always had the creative writing part of me waiting for the opportunity to get out and present itself in different ways. I had to do a lot of legal writing, which is technical and not that fun, but I became a good advocate. But now I get to creative writing is such a different thing, and it's so enjoyable to me. And so my first book is not quite a memoir. It's nonfiction, but it's two stories, mine and my grandfather's. And I touch on a lot of things that I saw in my work and, of course, in my family. And people will always say, well, what kind of person will enjoy your book? And you're not supposed to say everybody, but that's sort of, there's something in the book that touches people differently. And I've just had so much fun with it. It came out in June of 2023. And so it's been out for 2 years, and I've been trucking along, going to events and being on podcasts. And I just got back from Fort Worth, Texas, which is the location of the narcotic farm where my grandfather was. So I hit the jackpot where I got to present in Fort Worth about my grandfather's story. And my aunt and she's 88 years old. She flew from San Diego. I drove down from Minnesota, and we met, and we actually went to the grounds of the facility. And I get chills even describing it for you, because it was one of these things that was always in my imagination as I was reading his letters and putting them into the book. And to actually be there and see the facility and then speak to people in Fort Worth who had their own experiences with the facility. And so I like to say, this is the book that just keeps on giving. So I'm on this whole new adventure because of this book.
And as we discussed before we started the podcast, and all of that sounds both like fun and also a little wow, kind of a wow moment, because it looks like even now you're just sort of going, wow, I can't believe I did all that and encountered all that and touched my family history. But let's talk about this family history thing, because that's what I found fascinating about this book. And I'm trying not to go too long here, but in this current era where with social media everybody bears their souls, we know everything about everybody, but that wasn't the case in our parents and our grandparents' time. Mental health issue, addiction issues were something that wasn't talked about. Yet you went there. You went there and provided that third dimension, so to speak, because as we said, Cece and I have complicated parents, but we don't know about our grandparents and our great-grandparents' challenges because it simply wasn't talked about. So how were you able to go there? How were you able to talk about, reveal your grandfather's challenges? We actually know the answer, but I think your readers will be interested in that answer.
Well, I kind of feel like I have an outsized source of courage, which sometimes could be considered being a risk taker. And so I found this file folder of letters back in 2005, and I was going through them, and they just resonated with me, and I felt myself getting very emotional about it. But I didn't really talk about them with my dad or his side of the family back then. I always knew, though, that I wanted to write a book that somehow was the story of these letters. And at that time, I actually thought the letters themselves could have been a story in and of themselves. And if I were more skilled in writing fiction, I think I could have done that and made it really kind of kind of cool. But then as my dad got into hospice and I knew I was going to be losing him, I found myself sort of under a pressure to make sure I knew everything about him and about this situation. And my dad, unlike my mother, was one of the most open people I knew. Although I'm not sure how far you got in the book, but there was a surprise involving my dad and some of his own behavior as a young person that we truly never knew anything about. And so, but I really wanted to know, and I wanted to approach it in a kind, gentle way. And, it was something that had happened 70 years prior. And thankfully, my dad was the kind of person that didn't feel that kind of shame. He probably did back in the day, but he got over it and was willing to talk about it. And I think this book celebrates the sort of breaking of that shame. I think we all carry shame around things, but at some point you have to let that go. And I think 70 years is probably a good time to maybe let that go. And we were able to kind of make light of it. And I mean, my dad and I were. My mother, that was a whole other story.
So you mentioned that you had a folder of letters, which is an amazing thing to find because I have no idea what happened to any of my grandparents' documentation or anything, because obviously we had moved away when they passed away and their kids rightly split things up amongst them. So I have no real background on that. But after you found these letters, did you do any other research? Did you go to archives, or did the letters pretty much give you all the information you needed to get into this story?
Well, thankfully we have the Google, right? And so I did start to just put in general search terms like the United States Public Health Service. And I think it was in that search that I learned about the narcotic farm, because I don't know that my grandfather called it that in his letters. But once I got that, there was this wonderful book that had been written, and there was also a PBS documentary called The Narcotic Farm. And I got that book as soon as I learned of its existence. And it's a beautiful coffee table type book with all these pictures. And that was kind of my jumping off spot. And I started with that. And then once I left my old job and started writing this book in November of 2020, all of a sudden there was even more research that was out there. And I met Dr. Holly Karibo, who wrote a book called Rehab on the Range, which was specifically about the Fort Worth facility. So, and then I researched asthma and I researched Demerol, and I love the research. And so that was as fun for me as the actual writing, because it almost felt like I was just putting together this big puzzle, and the puzzle was going to be the book.
The research part is important, but also the personal aspect part. And there's a sentence that I think you dropped into this book that it was almost a throwaway sentence, but it resonated with me. And I keep using this word resonated because, again, we have complicated parents. But the sentence that I'm going to quote to you is, "I have come to realize that maybe, just maybe, I'm not the crazy one in the family." Now, being raised by complicated parents, we don't know what is the norm in the world, because our parents really are,
That was our normal.
That was our normal.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I went, whew, yeah, right there with you. Right there with you. Let's talk a little bit about that epiphany and the impact on who you are today.
Well, it's funny because just recently I saw some sort of meme on the internet that talked about how and I don't remember the exact words, but it's the sane people go to therapy to deal with their crazy relatives. And yet, and we're of the same generation, I believe, where, if you go and seek therapy, then you're the one who's got the problem. And depending on the various disorders, mental illnesses that other people have, there's so much projection, so much gaslighting. And as a child, if you're raised in an environment to not trust your own instincts or how you're feeling something, and I've gone now down a whole new research path of mothers that were of that silent generation who came of age in the 50s and the 60s, and their only choice in life was to get married and have children. And so many of them, I think, were very poorly equipped to do that job. And we, as the children, suffered the consequences of that. And so it just, the gaslighting, all these terms that we now are so familiar with. I have to say, back when I first started therapy, I was not aware of any of those things. And I think the pandemic was the thing that shifted, where more people were going to therapy. There was family therapy, the kids were in therapy. Everybody's in therapy. So I think nowadays, if I were seeking a therapist, I could just freely ask my friends, hey, are you in therapy? Do you like your therapist? I mean, whereas just back in 2016, when I was desperate at that point, I didn't think I could ask anyone. And that's not that long ago. I mean, it's 9 years ago, but so much has changed.
For the better, actually, I think, because
Yes.
there was the stigma and there was basically the shame, because as we were growing up, we sort of were getting, and I'm not meaning to speak for you, but we were sort of getting the idea that, hey, I don't think I'm going to have my friends over because they might see my parents.
Right. I was always happier to go to
Yes.
my friend's house.
Yes, actually, now that JT mentions it, I don't think I ever had friends over to my house. I always went to theirs. But you did mention that some of your research really came together kind of in 2020 and during the COVID period and everything. And not only did that open up the avenues for people to really go into therapy and talk about it and be comfortable with it, but I know personally that a lot more research materials were made available at that time. So do you think in writing this book, you actually hit a bit of a sweet spot in everything coming together at the right place at the right time to get you to the point where you felt you could put this book out there?
That's a really great question, because I started writing it in November of 2020. It didn't come out until 2023. And delays in publishing, as I know you're familiar with, it can be aggravating at times. But I've just been so impressed by, to your point, how it's resonated with people. And so many people have said to me, readers and book clubs and places where I'm at, or even in reviews, boy, I always felt like I was the only one who
Yeah.
felt this way. And that's the one thing that I have to put a plug in for the power of books, because books help us to connect with each other. And this being nonfiction, I think people now see me as, oh, like, you're a real person and this happened to you. Had I made it into fiction, certainly it would have hit a different audience in a different way. But I think, me just putting it right all out there. And again, I never felt like I was being particularly brave at the time, but I have had people say, this was really brave of you. And I think, okay, well, I had to get it out. I didn't want to keep carrying it around. And so that is my gift to myself, but I also feel like it's a gift to my readers. We can all then form a community.
And I have to say that what you're saying, is really pinging with us. But we did an interview with Dr. Deb Kosterman, whose mother, and she's a mental health professional, and her mother was a hoarder, and it was to the extreme. And it fell on her to resolve these issues, resolve the hoarding issues, clean the house basically, while her mother was alive, and move her to that next stage of life. And you talk about that struggle of, especially with your mother, again, a common theme of saying, hey, this is the next logical stage of your life, and her fighting back. I'm wondering if that anger that she exhibited, and anger is always complicated, is also part to what you said about, hey, this is the role that was chosen to me as I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, and I'm angry about it because I could have done so much more. Do you feel, am I out of line in saying something like that?
No, and in fact, we have had, my relationship with my mother currently is quite estranged. We have occasional contact. She's aware of the book. She's angry about the book. She's not read the book. My brother has picked out parts to read her that portray her in not the most positive of lights. And so there's not a full comprehension of the book. But I do, in conversations that we have had, I I envision her thinking her life was going to go a very different way than it actually went. And I don't know that motherhood was something she was excited about. She has used the word society with me when I've asked about, getting married and having children. She was 30 when she had me, and my dad was 37. And for that time in the mid 60s, that was old. I mean, women were giving birth right out of high school and had a couple of kids by the time they were in their early 20s. So I think she might have wanted something different for herself.
Yeah, that resonates, as JT has said multiple times, but that resonates with me as well because I'm also the product of a complicated relationship with my mother. And actually, so my father is still around, and we're not estranged, so to speak, but I don't know, the dynamic of what you would expect to be the Norman Rockwell kind of family versus I see my dad maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and it's pleasant, it's not terrible, but I don't know a ton about him. I don't expect that to change because he's becoming more open. He's 84 now. And my mother was quite the talker. So after she passed away, he actually did start talking to me a lot more. So I have learned some interesting stories about family history. So the fact that you were able to actually talk to your dad and get some of that information from him before he passed away, I regret that I wasn't able to get more of that from my mother because there were throwaway things she said as I was growing up that, it was, now I wish I had more detail because I'm not quite sure I understood what she was trying to tell me. And I do think a lot of what you're saying about her life choices, because she grew up in Ireland, she came to the United States. She and my dad were engaged to different people before they got together, and they had a very contentious relationship for 50 years. So I do think that what you've put out there does maybe help people kind of consider the current relationship they have with their parents. Oh, excuse me. Once they've passed away, there's not much we can do about it. So again, I do agree with JT that this is it's a powerful piece of writing. And I'm so glad you actually got the opportunity to put this book out there.
Oh, thank you. And to your point, I just think as storytellers, which we all are here, I think we are curious people because we create the stories, whether it's fiction or in my case, sort of making a story out of nonfiction. And I think that the parents of our generation, there were these barriers. Like there weren't relationships like you see now with the younger generation and their kids. And I remember, and I'm Gen X, and I feel like my contemporaries, when they started having children, I was a little taken aback by how familiar they were with each other and how open they were with their children and no secrets. And I was like, oh, is that, so I think there's a sweet spot to be found where I don't know how much you need to share with your child who's only 6 or 7 years old. I mean, but at some point, like when I became an adult, I felt like my dad always treated me as an equal, as somebody to talk to about adult things. Now, not inappropriately, but just that I had the capacity. My mother could not do that. And to this day, it's infantilizing, I think is the term. She still sees me as just a little child and, are you having a drink? It's like it's that kind of you never can get to the point where you can just be real with each other, I think. And that's person to person, but I think it's also very generational.
I think you're absolutely right on that. I think you're right because, again, it was only in relatively speaking, recent history that, people started to open up about these issues. And for folks like yourselves and other researchers to crack that very closed book is not only amazing, but it's a service because we need to know in order to cure. We can't cure without knowing.
100%. 100%.
Okay, let's go on. Let's mosey on to Act Two. And what it is we have adopted
both a little bit.
Both. The questions from the Inside the Actor Studios by
James Lipton.
James Lipton, I always get that.
Loved
What
him.
it is we're going to ask the writer's version of those questions in a way to help you connect to your readers and vice versa. So the first question is, what was your I am a real, honest to goodness writer moment?
So it was when my box of author copies came in the mail.
Book mail day!
Well, and I had seen everybody do this thing on social media. I have a reel, where I'm like, but really this is like how I imagined it would be. And I had the most fabulous designer, but to hold this book and just, I wrote this. Well, I wrote half of it, to be fair. I have to give my grandfather credit and the other family, because the letters are, maybe a third of the book. But yes, it was holding the book and saying, I wrote this.
That's a great moment. I think every writer that may be watching this will know that feeling, hopefully, because we released a lot of ebooks, but once you get the physical paperback or hardback version in your hands, it just makes it so much more real and tangible.
Yep.
It's exciting.
Yep.
So who was your writing role model and why?
So I have two. First is Jonathan Tropper, the new series on Netflix, Friends and Neighbors with John Hamm. He's written that. But I first discovered him. He wrote a book called This Is Where I Leave You. And it's the story of a Jewish family coming together to sit Shiva. And I just remember reading it. Came out in 2009, so it's been a long time out. But I remember I just loved his writing style. And I thought, this is the kind of, I want present tense. I want to just be boom, 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 boom. His dialogue is fantastic. And so he's my role model for how I want to write. But just recently, I picked up Stephen King's memoir on writing. I can't believe I hadn't read it until recently. I know. I kind of skipped over his memoir to write, because I was like, all right, I'll get to that. For the discipline aspect of it, when he starts and he talks about how to write sentences and how to plan your time and all of that. And I like writers who talk about the amount of time as opposed to, I need to write 3,000 words today or whatever. I mean, we're all different in the amount of pressure that we're going to put on each other or on ourselves anyway. So it's Stephen King for discipline and Jonathan Tropper for style.
Excellent. Good choices. Good choice. Okay. Fun question. What do you love about writing?
Everything. I'm just going to, it's funny because I can put out a first draft and then I love picking it apart. So that's the thing. Anyway, getting it all out, and then I actually love the editing and picking at each sentence and just kind of, anyway, so yeah, all of it.
Okay, so with that said, this may be a more difficult question. What do you absolutely dread about writing?
There's really nothing, because I will tell you, I have so many ideas every day in my head. And so I do a little monthly newsletter so I can get some of those out of there. I think getting them out of my head is so exhilarating that, even if it kind of looks like crap to begin with, I don't mind that. I know a lot of people agonize over each word and how it's going to be. I just kind of get it out there. Anne Lamott calls it the very blank first draft. Mm-hmm. And, I embrace that. It's like, just let's get that out there and then we'll start tinkering with it and all of that. So I'm not a person that, I got to sit down and write. I mean, no, I feel very fortunate now to have the time and space to write. So I'm going to take advantage of it.
And I've got to say, you are a unicorn in that area, because so many of us dread at least some part of writing.
Yes. Oh boy.
We love it, but we hate it.
Okay. So this entire interview, of course, is about a memoir. So this question is kind of, but we'll give it a shot anyway. What single significant life experience affects your writing, good or bad?
When I was in fourth grade, my fourth grade teacher was the first one to give us creative writing. And we had this little book and it had the lined paper and we got to make a cover and it was laminated. And I just remember that That was probably the earliest time that I thought, I like this. I wanna write. So that was a good, I would call it a good significant experience. And then it's just a matter of what are the stories I want to tell. And this one has been brewing, since 2005. So that was the first one to come out.
That's awesome.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
So we talk about complicated relationship with loved ones. So kind of with that in mind, would you recommend the writing life to a loved one, and why?
Here's the thing that I look at now as embracing myself as a writer. We are artists, and I think the artistic temperament, there is that piece to it. My brother is a very, very talented musician and composer. But so many people, I believe, are crippled with the self-doubt and it's not good enough and all of that. I started off a little bit like that. And I won't even call them beta readers because they were my friends. And I think they were not good at providing criticism. They just want a good job and this and that. And so I don't loved ones. If I care about somebody, I want to say you do what brings you purpose and joy. And I don't know that the writing life brings everybody purpose and joy. It brings me purpose and joy. So I recommend it if people have stories they want to get out, get them out. But publishing a book and going through all of that is a whole, as you know, that's a whole other thing. So I encourage everybody to write their stories. But the writing life, I think, that's very, very dependent on personality type.
Very true.
Very, very true. So last question, what is something fun, and unexpected from your past that we won't see in your bio?
So when I was a junior in college at George Washington University, I applied to and was accepted into the CIA operative training program.
Oh, wow.
And the way that was going to work is the summer between my junior and senior years, I was going to go to an undisclosed location in Middle Virginia. It was a Xerox plant or something. I don't remember, but I couldn't tell anybody. And I was going to do 6 weeks there. And then they would pay for my last year of school. And in return, I would owe them 10 years as a spy. So I have the letter. I believe I know myself very, very well. And I just kind of went, no, I don't think I can do this. And as you can tell probably from my book and my writing, I'm not a good secret keeper. I mean, everybody else around me keeps the secrets, but I'm not. And I think about 10 years of being somebody else. It seemed cool at the time when I was like 20, 21 years old, but I don't think I had the, fortitude to maintain that kind of facade for 10 years.
That's fascinating.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Those were really fun answers.
Yes.
Okay, so let's wrap this all up, Debbie. Where can we find you on the World Wide Web? What is your preferred social media platforms? Really, how can people find your book?
Well, I think the easiest to tell you is my website, www. Everything is there in terms of how you can buy my book. It came out on Audible earlier this year, so for people that like audiobooks, there's a link there. There's a link to Amazon, which always makes it cheaper. If you want a signed copy, you can order it directly from me. So the ebook is also on Amazon. So I think my social media, I am Debbie Russell, lawyer turned writer on Facebook, and I'm Debbie Stories on Instagram and what we're calling it X now, formerly known as Twitter. I'm not very active there anymore. It kind of just it stopped. I didn't seem to be getting much reach there, but I am on Instagram every day. I do a reel with my morning musing, and I walk the dogs and I talk about whatever it is I'm thinking about on that day. So
That's fun.
It's excellent. Very excellent.
Yeah.
So anyway, we want to thank Debbie Russell for appearing on our podcast and providing our community this fantastic, not quite a memoir, Crossing 51, which is an excellent read. And I am going to finish it, and maybe I'll try to get a review out there because writers love reviews, because reviews make us better writers, but more importantly, they make us better people. And so we need to get those reviews out there, folks. Any last words from anybody here?
No, I just think I want to thank you again for putting this out there because this has been a fascinating discussion and I've really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Likewise, likewise. And again, thank you so much for what you do for all of us.
We're glad to do it. For
Mhm.
the CC and JT Amateur Hour, y'all take care now. Bye bye.